So thank you all for joining us for environmental and health benefits of a plant-based diet. Meat production and commercial fishing consume lots of natural resources while generating significant amounts of pollution. So we're going to learn how to minimize our environmental impact and benefit our health with a plant-based diet. And this is led by Sara Sezun, who's a volunteer for the Sierra Club Massachusetts chapter. And Sara is the founder and chair of their Plant-Based Planet team. And I want to thank the Friends of the Library for sponsoring almost all of our programs. And I want to thank the libraries in Ashland, Groton, Bedford, Atkinson, Ayr, Stowe, West Newbury, Northbridge, Hooksett, and Vineyard Haven for partnering with Tewksbury and helping spread the word about tonight's program. So all 75 of us or so who are watching live and the many more that will watch the recording, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Sara for joining us here tonight. And Sara, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you for the introduction, Robert, and thank you also to everyone in the audience for coming from all over the country to attend. This is really a great opportunity for me as well as my Plant-Based Planet team, and welcome. I would like to start out by talking about the greenhouse gases generated by meat production. This slide shows the amount of greenhouse gas emissions in kilograms per kilogram of food. In other words, beef, 1 kilogram of beef generates 70.6 kilograms of greenhouse gases. According to the United Nations, 31% of all the greenhouse gases caused by humans come from agriculture, mostly in the form of carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide. Of these, 31% come from livestock and fish farms. In fact, 99% of the farm animals in this country live on CAFOs, concentrated animal feed operations. This is an industry term for huge farms. You see an aerial view of one on the left where you have thousands of animals, literally tens of thousands of animals crowded together in a small space, 10, 20, 30, sometimes as many as 50,000 animals. And the picture on the right is what it looks like inside. And yes, things really are this crowded in CAFOs. I'd like to add that in the case of cows, they personally create greenhouse gases in the form of methane. They digest their food through a process called enteric fermentation, which means that they burp out methane to the tune of 100 kilograms per year, which is equal to about 2,300 pounds of CO2 per cow. Fish farms also generate methane. As we see in the picture on the right, this is an indoor fish farm where the excrement collects on the bottom, and because there are no phytoplankton or aquatic plants as you would have in a natural environment to break down the excrement, it composes on the bottom without oxygen and creates methane in the process. A similar process can occur in outdoor fish pens, as we see on the left. What's more, because you have so many fish crowded into these small pens, they frequently get diseases or lice, or they will even start fighting with each other and get infections from the injuries. This is important to know because 49% of all of the seafood consumed throughout the world is farmed. And in this country, we import 75% of the seafood that is consumed. This chart shows land use in the world. It's pretty self-explanatory. Essentially, 45% of the habitable land in the world is used for agriculture. Of that, 80% is used for livestock, meat, dairy, and textiles, and only 16% for crops that are grown for food that directly feeds people. And then, even more shocking when you see how much of the global calorie supply comes from meat and dairy and eggs, as well as how much of the global protein supply. This map shows land use in the United States, and this big yellow square is mostly cow pasture and ranges. In other words, 41% of all the land in the lower 48 states is used for cattle. That's not farmland, that's all of the land, to either graze them or grow food for them. This light brown square here is 127 million acres that is used for livestock feed, mostly in the form of corn and soy, sometimes oats and alfalfa. I would like to add that of these major crops, corn, soybeans, alfalfa, wheat, and oats, 75% of them are fed directly to livestock instead of humans in this country. And this small beige rectangle is the amount of land, 77 million acres, that is used to grow food that is directly eaten by humans. And only 2% of our farmland is used to grow fruit and vegetables. This chart shows the water footprint for types of food. In other words, how many liters of water are needed to produce a kilogram of certain types of food. For vegetables, you see it's 322 liters of water per kilogram of vegetables, 962 liters of water per kilogram of fruits, but 15,415 kilograms of water per kilogram of beef. Meat production also produces tremendous amounts of waste. Factory farms produce 100 billion pounds of meat each year, which results in 940 billion pounds of manure, twice as much as the entire human population of this country. Now, theoretically, you could use this as a fertilizer. However, you really don't want to use factory farm waste as fertilizer because it's toxic. It contains germs like E. coli, hormones, which are used to make the animals grow quickly, and antibiotics so that they don't get sick in crowded conditions. And where does all this manure end up? In our waterways. This picture is from Wisconsin in 2016 of tap water. It was, I'm sorry to say, the best picture I could find to illustrate this point, but this is still relevant today. In fact, today, 25% of people in Wisconsin get their water from wells, and at this time, 80,000 of them are contaminated. The picture on the right is of, I'm sorry about that, of a hog farm in North Carolina after Hurricane Florence in 2018. I'm afraid I could not find a picture of a hog farm after Hurricane Helene swept through, but essentially the same thing happened. This small square here is what the industry calls a lagoon. They essentially dig a big hole, fill it with a thin layer of clay, and then they add in water and chemicals to break down the manure. So whenever there is a hurricane, this all overflows and it creates havoc throughout the countryside and contaminates the land and all the water. But even when there isn't a hurricane, this is serious because frequently the stench from these lagoons is so bad that people who live in the area can't go outside. This means children can't play outside, people can't hold cookouts, and in many cases can't even hang their laundry outside because it will end up smelling like pig manure. Then people get health issues, stress, headaches, nausea, and asthma. And worst of all, the companies say that this is fertilizer and they will frequently spray it on nearby fields. Now, if the wind is blowing, this manure can splatter onto people's houses and cars and create a big mess. Tragically, most of these hog farms are located in or near communities of color. African American, Native American, and Latinx. Companies such as Smithfield do this deliberately because they know that the people don't have the clout to fight them or the resources. Nevertheless, communities in North Carolina have been fighting legal battles for the past 30 years, and they have won a few victories. Now the difficulty is getting them implemented because the companies say that they can't afford to implement measures to treat all of this waste, but in reality, many factory farms produce as much waste as medium-sized cities. By law, cities are required to have wastewater treatment plants, but factory farms are not. Livestock production also has a serious impact on wildlife. In 2022, Wildlife Services of the USDA killed 384,000 native wild species, including coyotes, beavers, foxes, wolves, bears, cougars, and gophers. Last year, they killed 375,000 native wild animals. They say that this is necessary to protect people. To be fair, occasionally they do have to kill a wild animal to protect humans. Now, it's like no one wants to have a cougar or a bear charging at them. However, most of the time it's done to protect cattle. This is because it's easier for predators to attack cows than it is to go after deer or elk. However, you also have to consider that this is just one government agency, Wildlife Services. If you add up all of the animals killed by other federal and state agency, it adds up to 1 million wild animals per year. Ghost nets are a serious problem in the ocean. What happens is that these days, commercial fishing fleets have huge nets that can be several miles long, or else they are literally the size of cathedrals. Inevitably, they will start falling apart, and they're very big and cumbersome, and a big hassle to bring back on board to the ship. So frequently, the companies will, or the boats, the fishermen, will just let them loose where they continue floating in the ocean, and they're called ghost nets. They can break apart and still cause serious damage to wildlife. As we see in this picture on the left, this turtle has gotten entangled into part of an old ghost net, and this happens to many animals. What happens is they have to carry all this extra weight around, and this is very heavy for them. It's difficult, and they will eventually get weaker, making them much more susceptible to disease and eventually death. In the picture on the right, we see a fish that was killed by a ghost net. This is because these nets are designed to kill, and they continue to do that even after their useful life is over. At this time, it's estimated that about 10% of all of the plastic in the ocean is made up of ghost nets. In fact, it's even worse for the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, a huge area that is 1.6 million square kilometers large, twice the size of Texas. And in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, 80% of the plastic comes from the fishing industry. And with all this plastic in the ocean, yes, the fish are eating it. The fish on the left died from eating what appears to be a plastic bag. And this illustration on the right shows what the insides of many fish look like these days because they think the plastic is food. The North Atlantic right whale is one of the most endangered whales in the world. It got its name because back in the days of Moby Dick and Ahab and company, it was considered the right whale to catch. They're large, they have lots of blubber, they're slow moving, and they're gentle compared to a lot of other whale species. They were hunted almost to extinction. Today, there are only about 360 individuals left. And these days, the major causes of death are ship strikes, as well as fishing gear, especially lobster traps. As we see in the picture on the right, what happens is that the lobster traps are connected to the surface with a thin line. The whales don't see it, so they become entangled in it. And this ends up wrapping itself around the whale's body, causing severe lacerations, infection, and eventually death unless someone helps the whale. The New England Aquarium does have a special program to monitor and help whales. If they do see a whale in distress, they do their best to remove any fishing gear that the whale is entangled in. But unfortunately, it doesn't always work. Zoonotic disease transfer, it means essentially diseases that come from animals and go on to humans. This is primarily caused by CAFOs and habitat loss. The picture on the left is of a chicken CAFO. Poultry live in the most crowded conditions of any farm animals because they're the smallest, and you can crowd them in more easily, at least that's what the industry thinks. Essentially, if one of the animals gets sick, they all do. There's also very little genetic diversity among farm animals these days because they've been bred to grow and put on weight as quickly as possible. The picture on the right is of a rainforest that has been chopped down. Whenever you chop down a forest, the animals and plants die, but the viruses do not. They just find other hosts to latch onto, such as humans. This illustration shows you how it happens. Today, 3 out of 4 new diseases are coming from animals. Bird flu, mad cow disease, swine flu, AIDS, Ebola, SARS, and of course, COVID-19. Most recently, there was a listeria outbreak this summer. It was eventually traced to a boar's head meatpacking plant in Jarrett, Virginia. They did recall thousands of tons of meat, but they discovered that the contamination was due to bad conditions at the plant. Between August 2023 and this year, August of this year, Boar's Head was found to be guilty of 69 violations of noncompliance with USDA regulations. These included dirty machinery, leaking pipes, mold, puddles of blood on the floor, and meat buildup on the walls. If anyone remembers The Jungle, by Upton Sinclair, written in the early 20th century, things have not really changed all that much in slaughterhouses. Today, about 500,000 people work in slaughterhouses in this country, and most of them are people of color. Of them, 38% are immigrants, and many are undocumented. However, we don't know exactly how many are undocumented because slaughterhouse companies will often create false Social Security cards just so that they have people working for them. It happens to be one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. Workers have to deal with slippery floors, repetitive motion, high-speed assembly lines to keep the costs down and profit up. That's what companies do. Sharp tools. And then there's the emotional trauma of dealing with so much blood all day long, every day. In fact, 65% of meatpacking and food service workers have been injured on the job at least once. This is probably a conservative estimate because many companies pressure the workers not to report injuries. As it turns out, slaughterhouses, and especially the companies that clean these slaughterhouses, are also guilty of child labor law violations. In 2022, PSSI, which is the largest slaughterhouse cleaning company in the country, was found guilty of employing 102 children between the ages of 13 and 17 in 8 different states. And now let's get to the health benefits. The China study was the largest public health study done in history. Back in the 1980s, the Chinese government and Cornell University partnered to conduct this study. They looked at people in 130 villages throughout China, in every kind of geographical and climate condition imaginable. These were villages where people were still eating the traditional diet of their ancestors. What they found out was, essentially, that whenever meat consumption went up, so did all of the chronic diseases. Everything from heart disease to diabetes to cancer to dementia. Dr. John McDougall was one of the first doctors to start studying the benefits of a plant-based diet. His wife, Mary, who's also in the picture, is the one who creates the recipes for his health books. After he graduated from medical school in the 1970s, Dr. McDougall got his first job as a doctor in Hawaii. And back then, there were still many old-timers. These were people who had emigrated from Asia in the early 20th century, Japan, the Philippines, and China. And as it turns out, these elderly people, for the most part, still ate the traditional diet of their cultures, which focused on rice, vegetables, and very little meat or animal protein. Their children, who were middle-aged and had been born in this country, made some compromises. They ate some traditional Asian food, but they also ate some regular American food, so they generally had more health problems than their parents. The grandchildren, on the other hand, ate the standard American diet with a lot of processed food, a lot of junk food, and they actually were the most likely to get sick. This made Dr. McDougall wonder if eliminating meat could improve health, and he found out that it did. Over the years, he has done a lot of research on all kinds of health issues and how they benefit from a plant-based diet. Though here, I'm going to focus on weight loss. Dr. McDougall has a special program on how to eat a healthy plant-based diet and lose weight. And the best part is, you can eat as much food as you want. Dr. Neil Barnard is based in Washington, D.C. He's the founder of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Like Dr. McDougall, he's done a lot of research on all kinds of health issues and how they improve if you eat a healthy plant-based diet. Back in 2003, he did a study with the National Institutes of Health on type 2 diabetes, and they found that eating a healthy plant-based diet based on unprocessed whole grains, legumes, fruit, and vegetables was 3 times more effective at controlling blood sugar than the regular diabetes diet, The best part is you don't need to restrict your calorie intake. I would just like to say one disclaimer here. If you are a diabetic and you do choose to follow Dr. Barnard's diet, please do not stop taking your insulin unless your doctor says it's okay. I repeat, if you are a diabetic and you do choose to follow Dr. Barnard's diet, please do not stop taking your insulin unless your doctor says it's okay. Dr. Columbus Batiste and his wife Danette started Healthy Heart Nation, an organization that addresses health disparities in the Black community. Dr. Batiste also helped develop the Integrative Cardiovascular Disease Program at Kaiser Permanente. Heart disease is the #1 killer in this country. In 2021, 695,000 people died of it. The most recent rates by race that I have been able to find were from 2019 from the Centers for Disease Control. For every 100,000 people in this country, 210 white men died of heart disease that year, but 269 Black men, a difference of 59. For every 100,000 people, 129 white women died of heart disease, but 165 Black women, a difference of 36. And the only rates I could find for Latinos were from 2017. For every 100,000 people, 213 Latino men died of heart disease and 113 Latina women. Dr. Batiste, in addition to advocating for a plant-based diet, also addresses lifestyle factors, such as trying to de-stress whenever possible and to maintain as happy a lifestyle as you can by focusing on good human relationships and things that you enjoy doing. Doctors Dean and Aisha Sherzai are a husband and wife team, and they do research on Alzheimer's. I have read this book, The Alzheimer's Solution, and I must say it is excellent and really eye-opening, so I totally recommend it. I got it out at my public library, so hopefully it is in yours. They are based out of Loma Linda University in Loma Linda, California. And according to their research, more than 90% of all Alzheimer's cases can be prevented. How? Well, they explain everything in detail in their book, but one major thing is to eat a healthy plant-based diet. As the other doctors say, focused on unprocessed whole grains, legumes, fruit, and vegetables. The doctors Sherzai also recommend seriously reducing or even eliminating sugar intake, which they explain thoroughly in their book as to why you should do that. And I would like to add as one final thing about preventing Alzheimer's is that they say that, doing crossword puzzles is really good for you, keeps your mind engaged, and so on. Well, Dr. Dean and Aisha Sherzai say, no, crossword puzzles really don't help. The best things to keep your mind active if you want to prevent Alzheimer's are, 1, either learn a foreign language, or 2, learn how to play a musical instrument. And this chart shows cholesterol levels per 100 grams of food, with squid and shrimp being the highest. And now, how do you eat a healthy plant-based diet? Well, the best thing to do is eat whole grains instead of refined grains, because whenever you refine a grain, for instance, have white flour or white rice, you're removing most of the fiber and 1/3 of the nutrients. And then you'll have to eat more to feel full. So it's totally recommended that you eat whole grains. These are grains containing gluten, and you can buy hulled or hull-less barley as opposed to pearled, and it's much healthier. Wheat has several relatives. Einkorn was the earliest form of wheat. Farro, which I happen to be very fond of myself, can be cooked as a substitute for rice. Doesn't take that long to cook, sorry. Kamut was eaten by the ancient Egyptians, and spelt was commonly eaten in medieval Europe. And any of these 4 can be substituted for wheat if you're using flour. The only difference is you may have to adjust the liquid a little bit, using more or less. These grains are gluten-free. Amaranth, which is a tiny grain, no, that's not amaranth, sorry, was eaten by the Aztecs in Mexico, and quinoa was eaten by the Incas in Peru. Sorghum is commonly eaten in Africa, and teff is native to Ethiopia. Teff, by the way, if you go to an Ethiopian restaurant and you get that nice spongy bread called injera, it's made out of teff flour. I divide beans into two kinds, those that need soaking before being cooked and those that don't. These do not need to be soaked. These red beans are aduki beans, commonly eaten in China and Japan. And in Japan, they will cook them up and mash them up into a nice creamy paste that they use to fill pastries. These small green beans are mung beans, and they are commonly eaten in Japan, China, and India. These are beans that need soaking before being cooked. The best thing is to soak them overnight or for 8 hours. Chickpeas need to be soaked for 12 hours because they're so hard. And I definitely say soak these beans for a long time unless you're using an Instant Pot. Instant Pot, you don't have to, but if you're using a regular stovetop, yes, because otherwise they take forever to get cooked. I also recommend that you add the salt the last 5 minutes of cooking. Once you can pierce the beans with a fork relatively easily, because if you add the salt too quickly, they will just take forever to get cooked, forever to get tender. A final word about beans and protein is that people have this idea that you need to eat a lot of protein. No. Protein deficiencies in this country are extremely rare. The World Health Organization recommends that the average adult get about 56 grams of protein per day. In this country, though, most adults get about 100 grams of protein per day. More is not better, because it's just a lot more work for your kidneys, and it can lead to kidney failure, kidney stones, or gout, or the excess protein will just be stored as fat. Soy products are very versatile and high in protein. Miso, I do not have a picture of, but it's a brown paste. It's like a thick version of a soy sauce, has a lot of beneficial enzymes in it, and it makes a really good soup. I would like to add that miso may help with radiation sickness. In fact, after we dropped the atomic bomb on Nagasaki, unfortunately, one doctor whose team came to help the victims and the survivors told his medical staff to eat a traditional diet based on brown rice and miso soup and vegetables. His team was the only medical team that did not get radiation sickness. As for the others, I'd like to mention the concept of a thermal nature that is common in Asian medicine. Every food has a thermal nature, warming, neutral, or cooling. Foods like ginger and garlic obviously are warming. Watermelon and cucumbers are cooling, and so are soybeans, which means you should not eat them raw, with the exception of edamame. So let's start with soy milk. If you are cooking with soy milk, meaning if you're making a sauce or baking a cake or something like that, you can substitute it 1-for-1 for dairy milk. But if you are drinking it or adding it to your cereal, I recommend that you mix it 50-50 with water. Otherwise, because it's so cooling, you're eventually going to feel bloated and not so good, and it's going to be harder to digest. Tempeh, which is right here on the bottom, originated in Indonesia. Basically, what happens is they add a bacterial culture to whole soybeans, and essentially they multiply, and the tempeh and the soybeans will stick together. Tempeh, because of this texture, is a really good substitute for chicken and turkey dishes. However, if you are going to be using tempeh, I strongly recommend that you cook it for at least 20 minutes to kill the bacteria before you eat it. If you cook it for less, You're not going to die. It's not fatal. It's just that it's going to be harder for you to digest and it's not going to taste very good and you may get a stomachache. As for tofu, which is right up here, it comes in firm, silken, and soft textures, or sometimes extra firm if you're making some kind of cubed tofu dish or kebabs. And tofu should be cooked at least 10 minutes before you eat it. You should not eat it raw. If you're making a dish like a pudding or frosting with tofu that doesn't really need to be cooked, I recommend that you steam it for 10 minutes before you throw it into the blender. I always do that, and it tastes much better that way. It's also easier to digest. Beverages. Actually, the healthiest beverage of all is just plain old water, preferably filtered if you can. This is because water is the best liquid at removing toxins from your body. Some doctors say that you should not drink juices because they're too rich, because you're also removing all of the fiber and just getting the sugar of the fruit. I say maybe in moderation, or see if it's okay for you. Excuse me. However, I would like to say that alcohol is definitely not healthy. To begin with, it contains 7 calories per gram, almost as much as fat. And it can lead to weight gain, an increased risk for dementia or cancer, as well as to liver, heart, and kidney failure. The wine industry likes to say that if you have a glass of wine a day, it's healthy because there is a substance called resveratrol, which fights inflammation. True, but you can also get that from drinking grape juice or from eating grapes directly. That's the best option, is just to eat the grapes so you also get the fiber. There's really no need to drink wine if you want this health benefit. And now, how do you substitute for certain dishes? Well, for beef, you can use a lot of different things. Lentils are an excellent substitute for ground beef. And I have also made wings out of cauliflower, which tasted really good. And yes, you can make pork substitutes out of carrots. I have made the bacon and the pulled carrot. Tasted very good. And for egg substitutes, I would like to draw your attention to how to replace eggs in baked goods. Essentially, take 1 tablespoon of flax seeds and grind them up in the blender till they're pretty coarse. Then you add 3 tablespoons of cold water, grind that all up so it's nice and gooey, and then I like to let it sit for about 5 minutes, and that will replace 1 egg if you are baking a cake, quick bread, muffins, or cupcakes. I tried it once in pancakes, and it made the texture kind of heavy. I mean, you may like that or not, but it definitely works in cakes, quick breads, muffins, and cupcakes. And in fact, it will make them nice and moist. And then, let's see, I did mention, yes, you can use any of these plant-based milks to replace 1 cup of dairy milk. And you can make whipped cream out of coconut milk or tofu. And you can make cheese out of a lot of different things. Well, a plant-based cheese. And if you are baking, again, cake or quick bread, you can substitute 1 cup of vegetable oil for a cup of butter. Okay. And that's it. That's the end of my presentation. Are there any questions? I'll stop sharing now, Robert. Should I?
That's fine. So folks, let's give Sara a big virtual round of applause for a great presentation. And let's take approximately 15 minutes of audience questions. So if you have any questions, you can get them into the Q&A. If you have any comments, you can get them in the chat. Josie says, are you saying that silken tofu should be cooked I've used it for sauces and have never seen a recipe that suggests cooking silken tofu, excuse me.
Yes, I do suggest steaming it anyway. I mean, it's up to you ultimately, but I say from a nutritional standpoint, it does help because it's just going to be easier for you to digest. I mean, it's up to you, and recipes don't say this because most people are not aware of the premise from Chinese medicine because tofu was introduced to this country and adopted into a lot of vegetarian diets early in like the 70s and so on. But people didn't always know how it was used in Asia. For instance, in Asia, they never eat tofu raw. They always cook it.
So an anonymous attendee says, are canned beans used the same as dried beans?
Yes, you can substitute one for one if you'd like. Yes, if it's more convenient for you, sure.
And Eileen asks a related question. She asks, are canned beans okay?
Okay, yes, I guess so. If depending on how you wish to use them, sure.
So Judy says, interesting presentation. Thank you. Samuel says hello. Anne had to log off a little early. Ken says, very informative. I've enjoyed this presentation very much. So folks, last call for questions or comments. Sarah, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Sierra Club?
Yes, the Sierra Club is the oldest and largest environmental organization in the country with 3.8 million members and supporters. We work on a lot of different issues. There are chapters in every state, as well as Puerto Rico. And as I've said, we work on a lot of different issues. The Massachusetts chapter right now is doing a lot to promote renewable energy in Massachusetts. Because we want to fight climate change and we want to stay on target with our goals of, reducing emissions by 50% by 2030. So that I would say is one of the most important issues that we're working on now. We also do have a toxics team, transportation committee, energy committee, water team that works on issues related to preserving clean water, forest protection team. So, if you want to help us out, sure, we'd love to see you.
So Karen says, thanks so much. Marcia wants to know your opinion on clams. Are clams a good thing to eat?
Well, personally, I don't think so. I mean, you have to remember is that the oceans are very polluted these days, and not to mention, seafood is high in cholesterol, maybe lower in fat than beef or chicken, but it is generally high in cholesterol. I don't remember where clams are on the chart that I showed, but I do know that shrimp are very high in cholesterol. So you can use mushrooms or other things to substitute for clams.
So Marcia says, thanks so much. An anonymous attendee says, it was interesting what you said about soy milk. Do you recommend any other dairy-free milks?
Sure. I say there are so many of them available. You can also make your own dairy-free milk if you'd like. I say see what works best for you. There's also oat milk, flax milk, coconut milk, and so on. There are a lot. So see what works best for you, I say.
Robert asks, is natural peanut butter considered a processed food?
No, because if it is just grinding up the peanuts and maybe adding some salt to it, that is natural. I mean, it's processed when you start adding chemicals to it or processing it at very high temperatures so that it's, it loses its natural flavor and texture. But no, I mean, I love peanut butter myself. So yes, it's a natural food.
An anonymous attendee asks, what section of the grocery store do I go to find the tofu products?
They're going to be refrigerated. It depends on the grocery store. Sometimes they will be in the dairy section, or some places will have separate sections just for soy products.
So Elizabeth in the chat asks, or she notes, there are a lot of vegan convenience foods. How do I know which is healthy?
Read the labels, because yes, a lot of these convenience foods unfortunately do have a lot of additives and they can be highly processed. Essentially, if it's some chemical that, other than like sodium chloride, which is salt, maybe it isn't so healthy. But I say just read the labels. And if it looks too processed and there are too many chemicals, then no, it's not. I would suggest finding another product.
A few folks chiming in saying that tofu is generally in the produce area of their supermarkets. Let me see here. Lauren has a great question. She says, my husband is a devout carnivore. My daughter is an equally devout vegan for the past 5 years. Do you have a cookbook to recommend that might help my husband to accept some vegan meals?
There are a lot of good cookbooks on the market these days. I would say if he is a devoted carnivore, maybe start with another kind of food first. How about a dessert? Because people generally will, just look at a dessert and think it looks great and try to eat that first. You may also try some grain-based dishes like pilaf or rice dishes of some kind first. Risotto is a good thing. And then take it from there. But try maybe with another part of the meal first before getting to the protein.
So Toby says, if you get a tofu press for about 25 bucks on Amazon, it's a game changer for quicker, easier prep. Terry asks, do soy products affect your hormones?
Yes, the estrogen controversy. Okay, essentially, if you eat soy in moderation, no. I also recommend getting organic soy because it shouldn't. I mean, it does have some estrogen in it, but it won't affect your hormones if you eat it in moderation. What happened, I think, was that in the 70s, because tofu was just so versatile that many new vegetarians would overdose on it, eating it several times a day, and you shouldn't. Based on what I've read, having it maybe say 3-4 times a week is sufficient. But yes, or soy products is the best thing to do is eat a variety of different protein sources, as well as grains and vegetables and fruit.
So Laura recommends Big Vegan Flavor by Nisha Vera. And Nisha is the creator of Rainbow Plant Life. I believe that's a cookbook. Yep. So an anonymous attendee asks, what do you think is the easiest vegetarian meal to cook for a reluctant cook?
I would say easiest vegetarian meal. Probably pasta or polenta. And then if you find some marinated tofu at the store, to just, cut that up and cook that quickly, like saute that for, 10 minutes or however long you need to, so that it's nice and warm. But yeah, I'd say 10 minutes would be okay on a low heat. And then add that to the pasta. That would be the quickest vegetarian meal that I can think of.
And for the folks recommending cookbooks in the chat, so just as a heads up, Sarah did provide me with a resource list that I'm going to provide to all of you with the recording. And in there are a couple of cookbooks and a whole lot of websites for recipes. So you'll be getting that with the recording either later tonight or first thing tomorrow. So an anonymous attendee asks, in your opinion, is the general population trying to eat more plant-based food?
I think so. It seems to be changing slowly but surely. However, average meat consumption in this country is about 219 pounds per person per year. So it's still very high, but I think things are changing.
An anonymous attendee asks, do you really need to take vitamin B12?
I would recommend that you do, because your intestinal flora are supposed to produce B12, but given we have so many toxins in the environment, most people do not get enough, whether they are vegans or vegetarians or meat eaters. So I definitely recommend getting enough B12. You may also want to get which version of B12? I would say when you go to the store, I would ask them for recommendations. Make sure that it is a plant-based source first, because sometimes they do make it from egg protein or dairy protein. So make sure that it is a plant-based source and that it is a kind that can be absorbed by your body easily, because that can vary depending on the brand. I would talk to someone who works at the store and ask what they recommend.
An anonymous attendee says, I've never seen tofu uncooked. I've always seen it cooked with Asian cuisine. Judy says, having a vegetable garden certainly helps. Elizabeth wants to know your opinion on calcium.
Yes, calcium actually is best when it comes from green leafy vegetables or sesame seeds as opposed to dairy, because it's much more easily absorbed by your body when it comes from vegetable sources. Another interesting thing about calcium is that, believe it or not, the highest osteoporosis rates in the world are in the countries that have the highest dairy consumption. Yes, in Asia, where traditionally people did not eat dairy products at all, osteoporosis rates are the lowest in the world. They are the highest in this country, Canada, and Northern Europe. That's because it's much more difficult for your body to absorb the calcium from dairy products, and they can even leach calcium from your bones. Another thing that leaches calcium from your bones is carbonated beverages. Regardless of where they come from, regardless of the kind of sweetener they use, they do leach calcium from your bones.
And then Laura notes that lots of studies exist now that show soy to be protective for hormone-driven cancers. And with that, Sarah, I think we've gotten through all the questions and comments. I think there were roughly 15 questions we tackled. Do you have any last words for the audience as we start to wrap things up?
Yes. Please feel free to check our resource page for the Plant-Based Planet team. And this is a very broad topic. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot of literature out there, a lot of websites. So please feel free to explore. And it's been a pleasure giving this talk. If you have any questions, please check other sources as well. And thank you for coming tonight.
So folks, let's give Sarah one big last virtual round of applause for her presentation and Q&A. And as I said, you'll receive an email from me either later tonight or tomorrow with a link to this recording, as well as a resource list from Sarah. And just a reminder, please, when you exit the Zoom, please take the 7-question feedback survey. It should just take you a minute or so to fill out. So thank you all so much. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their night. Thanks again, Sarah.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.